She begged for water, but the human offered his name first. The sun beat down with an almost sentient cruelty, baking the planet's surface until it crackled beneath Liam's boots, each step stirring gritty dust into the air like ash from a dying fire. He paused, tugging the edge of his scarf up over his mouth to block the particles that clung to sweat-slicked skin, and scanned the horizon through tinted goggles smeared with grime. Sector 5 had once been a thriving alien farming colony, lush, with vertical gardens and irrigation systems unlike anything Earth had ever designed. But now it was just scorched Earth, scorched memories, scorched everything. As a civilian structural engineer assigned to the Earth Restoration Force, Liam had been on this godforsaken rock for 6 months, tasked with rebuilding infrastructure that Earth's own military had torn down during the rebellion, an irony he never stopped choking on. Most of the other restoration workers followed protocol like a religion. Arrive, document damage, deploy drones, leave. But Liam couldn't help noticing the human cost beneath the metal wreckage and melted glass. The absence of laughter where children should have played. The remnants of lives crushed beneath cold official orders. Today was supposed to be a routine assessment. He had walked this same stretch of sector before, noting a collapsed water tower and the brittle husks of biodomes no longer capable of sustaining life. But something different caught his ear today. Something small, barely audible beneath the whine of wind and creak of broken metal. He froze mid-step. A breath. Soft, ragged, barely human. He turned slowly, pulse rising. Not from fear, but from something closer to dread. He stepped around the jagged remains of a silo wall, charred black and half swallowed by sand, and saw her. Slumped against the base of the ruin was a figure so still he might have missed her entirely. A girl. Young. Maybe 12 by Earth standards. Though it was always hard to tell with alien physiology, her skin was a dulled lavender shade, streaked with dirt and blood, and her eyes were wide, too wide, the whites jaundiced from dehydration. Her lips were split, cracked to the point of bleeding, and when she tried to speak, only a hoarse whisper emerged. Water. Please. Liam's training screamed at him. Don't approach, don't touch, report immediately. This was protocol. Unknown contact, possible contaminant, non-compliant species. But something deeper, something buried in the parts of him that hadn't yet been eroded by war and rules overrode every instinct. He stepped forward, lowering himself slowly to his knees, hands visible and non-threatening. Hey, he said, softly, like speaking to a wounded animal that might bolt. It's okay, I won't hurt you. She stared, unblinking, her breathing shallow. Her hand twitched toward him, then dropped. Her need was clear. Her body screamed for water, for help, for anything. His hand hovered near his belt where the metal canteen swung, cool and full, sloshing softly with every movement. But instead of unscrewing the lid, instead of placing the life-saving water into her trembling hands, he said quietly, "My name is Liam." She blinked, eyes narrowing in confusion. "Water," she rasped again, brow furrowing as though unsure whether he was mocking her. But Liam held her gaze. "I will help you," he said. "But I want you to know I'm not just a soldier or a worker. I'm a person. My name is Liam." Silence hung between them, thick as the heat. The girl's head tilted, eyes searching his face. There was a beat, a single fragile second, when something shifted. Trust. Or the start of it. "Ara," she whispered, voice barely audible. "My name is Ara." Her body gave out then, her knees buckling, her small frame crumpling sideways into the dirt. Liam lunged forward and caught her before she hit the ground, her weight light, as air, bones sharp under parched skin. He cradled her gently, feeling the unnatural heat radiating from her starved body, the tremble in her limbs, the way her fingers clutched at his uniform, even in unconsciousness. He unscrewed the canteen and carefully dribbled a few drops onto her lips, watching as her mouth tried to move to swallow. It wasn't enough, not nearly, but too much at once would kill her. He needed help. He needed a medic. But calling this In would trigger alarms, and alarms meant soldiers, and soldiers meant bureaucracy. And the bureaucracy had already failed this girl once. He looked at her, Ara, and made a decision. Scooping her into his arms, he stood, her head lolling against his shoulder. She was burning up. He moved fast, keeping to the shadows of the ruins as he retraced his path to the restoration base's perimeter. Every checkpoint he bypassed tightened the knot in his gut, but he kept going, willing his body not to sweat, not to falter, not to show how wrong this was. When he reached the medical bay's rear entrance, he pounded on the sealed door until a tired voice buzzed through the intercom. "State your emergency. Civilian worker Liam Reese, code 73A. I've got a critical case, no time for clearance, she's dying." There was silence, then a hiss of decompressing air as the door slid open. A medic in loose scrubs stepped out and froze. "What the hell is that?" she asked, eyes locking on the girl in his arms. "Her name is Ara," Liam said. "She's a child. She was left behind. She needs help." The medic's expression shifted from shock to focus in an instant. "Bring her, in fast." Inside, the lights were harsh and sterile, the cool air a shock against Liam's sunburnt skin. They placed Ara on a cot, monitors blinking to life as the medic scanned her, inserted an IV, and began a rapid series of treatments. Severe dehydration, malnutrition. She's got old wounds, untreated. She's been out there a long time. Liam hovered nearby, watching every movement, heart thudding. "She told me her name," he said, barely above a whisper, before she passed out. The medic shot him a glance. "And you gave yours first." Liam nodded slowly. "Yeah." The medic didn't smile, but something in her face softened. "You did good, Reese. Dumb, but good." Outside, the base moved like a machine, unaware that a small, broken girl had just been pulled back from the edge of death. Liam stayed by her side into the night, unable to shake the image of her eyes when she whispered her name. She wasn't supposed to be here. The evacuation orders had said all civilians were cleared from Sector 5 before the final sweeps. But clearly, someone had lied. Or worse, they hadn't cared. And now here she was, skin stretched over bone, a ghost in a child's body, whispering for water and getting a name instead. Liam didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe command would find out. Maybe he'd lose his job. Maybe worse. But as Ara stirred beside him, breathing steadier now, her small hand twitching toward the edge of the blanket, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. If he had to do it all over again, every broken rule, every risk, he'd still give her his name first. The medbay was dim except for the quiet, pulsating glow of biomonitors casting a pale green light across Ara's sleeping form, her chest rising and falling with fragile rhythm as the fluids worked their way through her desiccated veins. Liam hadn't moved from his chair in hours. He sat rigid, jaw clenched, fingers interlocked and resting against his lips, watching her like she might vanish if he blinked too long. Outside the tent walls, the sounds of generators hummed low, and somewhere nearby, a security patrol marched, past in rhythmic steps, the metallic clatter of boots echoing faintly against the steel decking of the mobile base. Every sound made his stomach tighten. He had violated protocol in nearly every way imaginable: unauthorized contact, unregistered species entry, failure to report a possible biological threat. But none of that felt real as he looked at the girl who should not have been alive. The girl who now slept because of a choice that had nothing to do with policy and everything to do with conscience. The medic, Dr. Mara Kingston, had stopped questioning him after the first hour. Maybe because she recognized something in his silence, or maybe because she'd spent too long watching this war chew through people who once believed in rules. "She's stable for now," Kingston murmured, entering data into a handheld screen. "The fever's broken, kidneys are responding. She's a fighter." Liam gave a tight nod, not trusting himself to speak. Kingston sighed. "You do realize when command finds out they'll burn you for this, right?" Liam finally turned to her, eyes dark and tired. "Let them," he said. "She was left to die out there." Kingston didn't argue. She just walked over and gently adjusted Aura's IV. "You'll need to make a report eventually," she said. "Might as well start gathering the truth before someone else writes it for you." But the truth, Liam realized, was more complicated than a field report or a series of biometric scans. The truth was that Aura wasn't just a casualty. She was evidence. Evidence of either gross negligence or deliberate abandonment, both of which the unified Earth Coalition would do anything to bury. And if she spoke, if she remembered, then she might be more dangerous than anyone realized. Hours passed. Morning came in that pale, artificial way it always did on restoration sites, with no real sunrise, just a gradual lightening of the synthetic sky canopy above the base. Aura stirred around dawn, her eyes fluttering open slowly like they were crusted shut from centuries of sleep. She didn't speak right away, just blinked at the soft light above her. Her lips slightly parted as she tried to process where she was. Liam leaned forward. "Hey," he said gently. "You're safe. You're in a medical tent. You're okay." Her head turned slowly, weakly, eyes locking onto his face. For a moment her brow creased in confusion. Then recognition dawned. "Liam," she whispered. The sound of his name in her voice sent a strange ache through his chest. He nodded. "Yeah, I'm here." She looked around, muscles tensing slightly. "Not outside." "No," he said. "You're not outside anymore." A tear slipped down her cheek unbidden. "You stayed." He nodded again, swallowing. "I said I would." The silence stretched as she tried to form her next thought, her voice still hoarse. "Why, not water first?" Liam smiled faintly, sadness in his eyes. "Because I needed you to see me. Not as a soldier, not as someone who might hurt you. Just someone who cared. Someone who had a name." Aura didn't speak again for a while, but her eyes didn't leave his. Trust, real trust, was rare in war zones, and it wasn't built through medicine or food rations. It was built through names, through presence, through staying. Over the next 3 days, Aura began to recover. Slowly. Her appetite returned in small sips and spoonfuls. She moved with effort, like each limb weighed more than it should. But her mind, Liam noticed, was sharper than anyone expected. She listened intently to everything said around her, memorizing the layout of the medbay, asking quiet questions about machines, about Earth, about words she didn't understand. At first, she only spoke to Liam, refusing to make eye contact with the nurses or aides. But one night, when he read aloud to her from a children's reader he'd borrowed from the education module, she asked for the book. When he paused, she held it in trembling fingers, tracing the letters. "We don't write this way," she said. "Our words are sung." Liam was fascinated. "Can you still remember the songs?" She hesitated, then nodded. But they hurt now. He didn't push. She was already carrying enough pain. One evening, just before lights out, Aura asked a question that chilled him. "Are there others?" He frowned. "Others like you?" She nodded. "Children. Survivors." Liam hesitated. "The officials said there weren't. That all civilians were evacuated from Sector 5 before the bombings." "They lied," she said quietly, staring down at her hands. "There were many of us. My mother told us to hide when the sky turned black. She put me in a storage pit, said she'd come back. She never did." Liam felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. "How long were you there?" "I don't know time your way," she whispered. "The food was gone fast. Water after that. I didn't come out for days. When I did, they were all gone." He closed his eyes. The mission briefing for Sector 5 had claimed the village had been evacuated before the military strike. A rebel stronghold, they said. No innocents left. But Aura's story didn't match that. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a cover-up. And if she remembered what she'd seen, if others had survived and were later silenced, then the implications, could unravel command decisions that had been buried under miles of bureaucratic red tape. That night, Liam couldn't sleep. He sat at his terminal and accessed the encrypted military logs using backdoor credentials he'd borrowed from a former officer who owed him a favor. What he found confirmed his worst fears. The original clearance for the strike on Sector 5 listed it as a low-risk target, inhabited by agricultural civilians under no known rebel influence. But something had changed. 48 hours before the strike, a new order had been uploaded. Status revised to active threat zone. Evacuation status nullified. No reason given. No supporting intelligence attached. And worse, no logs of any post-strike civilian scans or refugee lists. They'd simply wiped the area clean and moved on. Liam sat back, staring at the screen. Ara hadn't just slipped through the cracks. She was deliberately left behind, or ignored. He copied the files onto a secure drive and locked them away under triple encryption. If someone found them, both he and Ara would disappear. But if the truth came out the right way, at the right time, it could change everything. In the following days, he watched Ara grow stronger. She began to walk on her own, short steps from the bed to the doorway. She asked for books, drew pictures. One morning, he found her sketching a shape in charcoal on her bed sheets, a circular symbol with interlocking lines. "What is it?" he asked. She looked up. "My village. Our name. You remember it?" She nodded. "We were called Ilion. It means peace made roots." Liam felt something catch in his throat. "Ara, I think they tried to erase Ilion." She nodded slowly. "I know." Then quietly, almost brokenly, she said, "But you remembered me. So they didn't finish." In that moment, he made a vow, not out loud, but deep inside where promises become steel. He would protect her. From the military. From the media. From anyone who tried to silence her truth. And maybe, just maybe, he'd find a way to make the world hear her voice before it was too late. Liam stood at the edge of the base's communications tower as the wind pulled at his jacket, the desert below vast and red like an open wound, and he could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him like gravity itself. He had evidence of a war crime, a living witness with a memory sharp enough to slice through official lies, and no clear path forward that didn't end in punishment, erasure, or both. And yet behind him in the medbay, Ara had just asked for crayons, as if that single gesture could reach back in time and repaint her burned childhood into something that resembled safety. And that thought, that hope, was what made him step away from the railing and begin to plan, not a grand rebellion or a heroic expose, but something quieter, more dangerous, something human, a way to smuggle a voice past a system designed to silence, starting not with a broadcast, but with a question to a person he never thought he'd trust again, Sergeant Reed Monroe, a logistics officer with a record full of necessary decisions and a past knotted with guilt Liam hadn't been ready to forgive until now. They met at the storage hangar under the guise of a routine maintenance review, but Liam didn't waste time with pleasantries, only shoved a data stick into Monroe's hand and said, "Before you speak, look at the encryption level and ask yourself why I'm trusting you with this." And Monroe, to his credit, didn't protest, didn't scoff, just raised one eyebrow and slid the stick into his reader, eyes scanning, mouth flattening into a grim line as red-flagged files opened, time-stamped orders, revisions, names scrubbed from rosters, and most damning of all, a casualty log from Sector 5 marked 0 civilian casualties, 3 days after Ara said she'd climbed out of her pit and found her world turned to ash. Monroe looked up slowly. "Where is she?" he asked. And Liam didn't answer with words. He just led him through the tunnels beneath the base, past the surveillance lines, and into the medical storage wing where Ara now spent most of her days, reading Earth history books and drawing star systems she remembered from her family's migration paths. And when she saw Monroe, she stiffened, instinctively putting the crayons down and backing against the wall. And Liam said softly, "It's okay. He's not here to hurt you." And Ara didn't believe him at first. Not really. But then Monroe knelt down, took off his cap and said, "I didn't know anyone was left." His voice not an excuse, not even a defense, just a confession. And that was enough to keep her from running, enough to let her listen. They talked for hours, about Ilian, about the evacuation that never came, about the patrols she heard walking past while she hid underground in a vent chamber barely wide enough for her body, and each story she told etched deeper cracks into Monroe's weathered face until finally he stood and said, "We can't tell Command, not yet, but there's someone at Central Medical I trust. If she sees this girl's file, it can't be ignored." And Liam nodded because that was all he needed. One person to validate Ara's presence officially, and from there, maybe, a path out. The plan was simple in theory. Get Ara on a Medi. Transport listed as a juvenile refugee from a destroyed neutral colony. Falsify the ID tag just long enough to get her admitted to a civilian facility outside the military chain of command. And then, when she was safely beyond reach, release. The data not all at once but piece by piece, starting with a trusted journalist who'd spent 2 years trying to expose the darker side of Earth's outer world campaigns. A woman named Casey Vell, who'd once interviewed Liam about infrastructure failures, but who'd made it clear, off record, that she was more interested in buried bodies than broken bridges. But before they could move, trouble found them in the form of a visiting official, Captain Delaney, an inspection officer known for turning bases upside down with audits that had little to do with truth and everything to do with optics. And from the moment Delaney arrived, his eyes felt like searchlights, scanning for stories that didn't fit the script. And it didn't take long for him to hear whispers about the girl, because secrets don't stay secret in closed systems. And one orderly, trying to be helpful perhaps or just curious, asked a nurse why the medbay kept allocating supplies to an unregistered patient. The red flag hit Delaney's desk by noon, and by evening, 2 soldiers were sent to investigate. But they found only an empty cot and a discarded book with crayon drawings on the last page. Liam had moved Ara hours earlier, tucking her inside the environmental crawlspace behind the hydro lab where noise sensors were disabled due to faulty wiring. And there she stayed, crouched in the dark with a water flask and a box of energy cubes, drawing quiet constellations with the glow tip of Liam's pen, while he and Monroe scrambled to push the transport paperwork through before anyone realized how close they were to exposing something vast and irreversible. Tension escalated fast. Delaney doubled the guards, restricted lab access, and began a formal audit of all non-human interactions logged in the past month. And it was only thanks to Monroe's override codes and a sympathetic transport pilot named Singh that they managed to slip Ara into a supply crate marked medical cultures, fragile, just minutes before the outer gate scanners went into lockdown. Liam watched the ship ascend from a vantage point near the west fence, breath caught in his throat, heart stuttering as the shuttle's lights disappeared into the sky, and only when the final echo of engines faded did he allow himself to sink to his knees in the dust and let go of the tension he'd held like a storm inside his bones for days. She was gone, but not lost, not this time. She was safe, at least safer than she'd been since the day her world burned. And in the quiet that followed, Liam stood again, dusted off his trousers, and walked straight to his terminal where the first file, a redacted order with mismatched timestamps, was queued and ready to send, not to a government office or an Earth Coalition archive, but to Casey Vell with a single message. This is only the beginning. Listen for the girl who remembers the songs of Ilian. He hit send, then leaned back in the chair, eyes closed, letting the guilt, fear, and relief wash over him all at once. Behind him, Monroe stepped in and asked, "You ready for what comes next?" And Liam said, "No, but I'm doing it anyway." The morning after Ara's escape was the kind of stillness that follows a storm, heavy with the knowledge of what was lost, but also charged with the possibilities of what could be saved. Liam stood in the empty command center, a place that had once felt like home, now hollow and foreign, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. Behind him, the terminals hummed in silence, their screens filled with routine data and orders that no longer had meaning. He was no longer part of this, part of the system that had allowed Ara's village to burn, that had buried truth beneath layers of bureaucracy and control. He was a man without rank, without allegiance, a man who had chosen to stand by a single fragile life when the world demanded him to turn away. The comlink on his desk blinked once, then again. He didn't need to look at it to know what was coming. The message had arrived. Casey Vell. The journalist he'd reached out to days before had received the encrypted data. The weight of the world pressed down on him as he opened the message. The first line was simple, but it carried the weight of everything that followed. I found her. He didn't wait for the rest of the message. Instead, he stood, pulling on his jacket as the final pieces fell into place. He had one chance to ensure Ara's survival, one chance to make sure that the truth wouldn't be buried again, like the memories of so many others who had fallen victim to the same injustice. He reached for the comlink again, dialing Monroe's encrypted number. It's time, Liam said, voice steady. Monroe didn't hesitate. On my way. Within minutes, Monroe arrived, looking more like a soldier than he ever had before. His uniform crisp, his face set in the determined expression of someone who had chosen the right side, even if it meant burning bridges with everything he once believed in. Everything's in place, Monroe said, his eyes flicking to the terminal where the files were already being transmitted to Vell's network. The transport's scheduled, but there's still a lot of risk, Liam. If anyone catches wind of this, they won't, Liam interrupted, his voice firm. Not now, not after everything we've done. Monroe nodded, but Liam could see the doubt in his eyes. It wasn't that Monroe didn't believe in their plan. It was the reality of the consequences. They both knew too well. They were about to set the world on fire. But it wasn't a fire that could be ignored. Ara's story wasn't just her own. It was the story of every forgotten village, every erased identity, every life the military machine had deemed expendable, in the name of collateral damage. Ara's survival was a symbol of resistance, of truth, of something that could no longer be swept under the rug. And the universe was about to know it. The shuttle was waiting outside, cloaked under the shadows of the base's outer hull. The rendezvous was set for deep in the desert, in a location known only to a select few. If all went according to plan, Ara would be safely away before the coalition could react. They had a narrow window, and nothing could afford to go wrong. Monroe opened the transport door, revealing the dim interior. Ara was inside, her eyes wide with uncertainty but also with something else. Something Liam hadn't seen before. Hope. You ready? Liam asked, crouching down to her level, his voice gentle. She nodded, but her hand trembled as she reached for his. I don't want to leave, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But I have to, don't I? You don't have to leave, Liam said softly, but you do have to be safe, and this is the only way. He wasn't lying. The only way forward was through the chaos they were about to unleash. He knew that the world would never look the same after this. They were about to expose everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The coalition would retaliate, of course, but the truth was far stronger than any retaliatory strike they could make. Ara's survival was a ticking time bomb, but it was also the key to a better future. Once the world knew what happened to her, and to those like her, the old system would be irreparably fractured, and there would be no going back. As the shuttle's hatch closed, Liam felt a strange calm settle over him. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about the next mission or the next briefing. He wasn't looking for the next order or the next kill. He was simply living. The shuttle rumbled to life, and they ascended into the desert sky, leaving the base and the past behind. For the first time in his life, Liam was free. They flew for hours, the landscape below them blurring into the endless stretch of red sand and rock. As they approached the hidden location, Monroe turned to Liam, his expression hardening. This is it, he said. Are you sure about this? Liam looked out the window, his gaze hardening. There's no turning back. Monroe didn't argue. He knew the stakes as well as anyone. As the shuttle descended, they saw the distant outline of a convoy waiting for them. Casey Vell's team had already set up, the crew moving quickly and efficiently, like a well-oiled machine. When they landed, Casey herself was waiting, her face a mixture of determination and something else, something softer. "You made it," she said, her voice low. "I wasn't sure you would." "We had no choice," Liam replied, stepping out of the shuttle. Ara was close behind him, her hand still in his. "I've brought you a story. The kind of story you've been looking for." Casey's eyes flicked to Ara, and the journalist's expression shifted. "I thought you were lying about the girl." "I don't lie," Liam said, his voice firm. "I don't have to." Ara stepped forward, and for the first time since Liam had met her, she smiled, a small, tentative smile that held the promise of something new, something beautiful. "You'll hear my story," she said, her voice steady, "and I'll remember it all." The cameras began to roll, and the world was about to change. The truth was out. Ara's voice, the voice of every forgotten soul, was now being heard, and there would be no turning back.